We're going to start the meeting, the April 3rd, 2025. And I'm going to begin as we do with attendance. And Linda?
Here.
Peter?
Present.
Aaron?
Here.
John?
Here.
Lee?
Here.
Mark?
Here.
Dan here? Scott? Here. And Elizabeth?
Here.
Thank you.
Check it, see if we have anybody online.
Okay. Oh, Emily is, I'm not.
I'm here virtually, guys.
Oh, hi, Emily. So you're here. Thank you for that.
Here.
And Patrick, maybe? No? No. Okay. Somebody interested in being the clerk? Is that the wrong way to frame that question? Who? Thank you, Linda. And then we have just-in-time minutes for March 24th, 2025. Patrick was the clerk. Anyone have any comments on that?
Motion to approve.
Do you want some time? Do you want to postpone it, or you're?
I would, unless everyone's already read it.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, we will do it at our next meeting then. Thanks. Okay. 12:05, looks like hellos, revisit the schedule and engagement. Does that mean that I'm going to turn this over to you to do hellos? All right, thank you, Ian.
Hello, everybody. Hello, online. So thank you so much for taking the time off meeting schedule to meet with us for this first presentation and workshop of the MCI Concord redevelopment site. We're really excited to share a large amount of information from analysis that this team has been going about for the past month. And so we have a lot that we want to cover, and we're going to just jump right in. No, it was working. Okay. All right. So, as Dan mentioned, we wanted to start with hello, a little bit more of kind of a table setting, talk a little bit about our schedule, about engagement, about what's happened so far. And then we're going to dive pretty quickly into our summary of analysis. So, board members, you received a very long presentation that was also a summary of our analysis, but this is a summary of that summary of the analysis. And so if there's anything that we didn't cover in here, that's not because we don't think it's important, it's because we have 2 hours together. We want to make sure that we share our big takeaways with you all, and we can have a discussion around that as well. So we're going to go through our summary of analysis. After about 50 minutes, we want to share what our emerging themes are, and I'll share a little bit more about what that looks like in a moment. And then we want to put you all to work. So we're going to workshop those themes together, essentially start to identify or really lean into the vision that you all had started to assemble last year, and essentially use that understanding of those visions to start to assemble scenarios. And then we'll dig into next steps at the end. Hopefully we have some time for further discussion. And then from there, we're going to start digging into scenarios. So, project schedule. We spent about the last month really digging into getting to know the place, getting to know you, getting to know your work thus far. And now we're very much diving into analysis. As you can see, that analysis green bar, we're right at the center of that analysis green bar. So this is not us saying that we are done with analysis. This is not us saying that there won't be further deeper dives into documents that we've received or documents that we will continue to receive or conversations that we have, but that this is a moment of just vetting and refining what we've learned so far with all of your institutional knowledge. I've jumped past listen. That's not because listen isn't important, but because we've been busy working with designing justice, designing spaces on the engagement strategy, and we'll share a little bit more about that in a moment. And that is going to happen at various moments over the next several months. And then last but certainly not least, in vision. So that's where we really start to dig into scenario development, that preferred scenario, and then also the final deliverable recommendations that we want to make that will move you all forward towards redevelopment. So we've taken what is a very simple schedule, made it much less simple by sharing this with you all. But essentially what we wanted to do is just reinforce or describe for those in the room and for those online what milestones we're starting to land. So on that top line, the advisory board meetings and workshops, this is our second meeting with you all. We had our kickoff on February 25th. Today is April 3rd. It's been a little over a month, and so excited to share what's happened since then. We'll be coming back together at the beginning of May 5th, during your typically scheduled meetings, but we'll be extending that meeting to have another one of these kind of working meetings together with you all. Then that will be a moment to talk about scenarios. Then at the beginning of June, we'll be coming back together to refine the final scenario and to go about assembling the draft plan. At the very end, we have on the 23rd of June, a final meeting to go through the final draft plan, make any refinements together, and then talk about what it means for implementation. The second row is our outreach subcommittee meetings. So that's where we're very much focusing on assembling and starting to deploy public workshops, the website, various themed conversations together with that committee. And so our meeting with them tomorrow is going to be chock full of deep conversations about content that we've created and where do we go from here with that group. We'll be meeting again with them in May to report back on engagement and then also to start to plan for next phases of engagement. And then again in June to talk about how we communicate out the draft plan and get feedback on that. In rows 3 and 4, this is where we are starting to have conversations with DCAM, with Department of Transportation, starting to have conversations with various committees. And this isn't just the consultant team, this is the town of Concord, this is the advisory board. Everyone is working together to start to have, give updates to folks and get feedback from folks. In row 5, so the themed community conversations, these haven't been landed yet, but we imagine that once we've had our first public workshops, what we'll do is we'll have deeper dives into the various topics we'll talk about with you all today, together with the community for folks that are really interested in talking about mobility or really interested in talking about housing or future development. Those are the moments for those conversations to happen, those deeper conversations. But we do have planned our first pop-up, which is happening on April 19th. We're excited to have the chance to join the 250th anniversary event. And that is our first real moment gathering feedback in person with the public. And in that moment, we are planning to do a similar activity to the one that we're doing with you all today. Then we have planned our first round of public workshops, April 30th, and we are landing the venues and the specific times, but we'll share those with you all quite soon, as well as the scenarios workshop, which will be happening on May 28th. Those two moments are undergirded by more of a longer term or ongoing approach to engagement, which include an online survey as well as the website. And so I'll share a little bit more about the website in a moment, but the online survey we're excited to talk through with the engagement subcommittee, the outreach subcommittee, and refine that together. So we're working with Designing Justice, Designing Spaces on how we think about engagement for this effort. They are currently online joining us, and so they can answer any questions you all have. But they've crafted this really wonderful way of thinking about how engagement should happen so that we make sure that we are meeting people where they are, gathering feedback from the many layers of town stakeholder folks or audiences that we have, and then also ensuring that we are clear and consistent in communication. So there are 4 zones. The first, that smallest red zone, that is this group that we are really asking you to engage most deeply with this project in a way that we are not asking others to engage with this project. You are meant to guide the vision for this, as well as to absorb and to help be ambassadors for this plan through your various networks, your various communities. Zone 2 is the community directly impacted by this project. That is the town. That is the town as a municipality. It is the community that exists around this site. And so we think about engagement in a different way. We're not asking them to come to a 2-hour meeting on their Thursday afternoon, but we will be asking them to engage with us in a way that supports their busy lives and their needs as well. Zone 3 is quite similar. This is interested organizations, individuals, and neighbors of the site, as well as Zone 4, which is general public, people who visit Concord, people who have a relationship to Route 2, people who understand or know the prison. This is a chance to engage that much broader group in a more of a informational way. So we've been working on assembling the website. A big shout out to the outreach subcommittee for a lot of organized information to help us get to a draft, and we're going to share that draft with that committee in our meeting with them tomorrow. But a few screenshots of what that website includes: deploying the various colors that relate to the color palette that I know is in your logo already, communicating what the project is about, giving us a chance to do a little bit of more fun engagement in real time so that people can start to see what their neighbors are saying, and then also showcasing and sharing big events. So we'll be sharing that with the subcommittee tomorrow, but just as so that you all are aware where that website stands, here's a draft. And the hope is that so long as the outreach subcommittee feels good about where the website lands and what is on it, we'll plan to publicly deploy that next week, and that will be available via www.mci-concord.org. So for today, what we want to focus on is sharing the analysis and getting your thoughts and ideas about where we go next. So as I said previously, this is a preliminary analysis. This is not the end of the analysis stage. We will continue to refine things together, but are excited to review it with you all today. We want to identify what we're calling foundational about the site. So what are the things that are fixed about the site and its surroundings versus what should we plan to test and how much should we plan to test it within the scenarios. And then last but certainly not least, we want to know what your goals, and we want to better understand the vision that you outlined last year. We want to understand what that is in this moment for the site's identity to inform the assembly of scenarios. And to us, it's important to share the analysis before we go about that exercise, because that will inform how we all assemble our visions. I'll share in a moment how the analysis is structured, but there are 6 topic areas. In each of those 6 topic areas, we will start with a big takeaway. What is the biggest thing that we learned about that particular topic? And then at the end of the chapter, you'll see 2 separate lists. One list are those foundational, those kind of given pieces of information that we know about the site that we don't think will change. And then we will have another list that I think we previously called toggles, but are really leaning into what are the things that need to be tested per the scenarios. And so we'll walk through each of those, as well as we'll share some highlights from our analysis. There are 6 analysis topics, and of course there are also many cross-cutting themes. So while buildings and structures on the site, the open spaces and recreational amenities that surround the site, transportation and access needs, both thinking about Route 2, transportation, trails, energy and infrastructure, so what exists on the site and what is possible surrounding the MCI Concord site, and then our deeper understanding of the regional context of economic development and feasibility for future development are 5 really important, more tactical or tangible topics. And then what is connected to each of those is Concord's community and your culture. So I'm sure there are a lot of questions about, well, what about this topic and what about that topic? Things like history, equity, resilience, all of those to us are cross-cutting. They touch each one of these topics, and we're excited to explore those more deeply as we talk about identities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robin, and she's going to walk us through community and culture.
Hi, everyone. Robin Bankert with Merge Architects. Okay, so we will kick off the analysis section with the community and culture. We're kind of looking high level here, asking ourselves, what makes Concord and West Concord unique? And when we ask that, we're keeping in mind the amazing opportunity here for the redevelopment and repurposing of this prison site. It's really a project with national significance. So what we've come to understand is that Concord is a town with a rich history and progressive roots. It's also a town that is experiencing demographic shifts and some pressures on affordability. And so the town is kind of working to balance that. So Concord is a town, a historic community with progressive ideas. And as we discuss prison repurposing, we think it is of significance that Concord has deep connections with social justice movements in history. Notably, its participation in the Underground Railroad and being the birthplace of transcendentalism, which emphasizes free thinking, social reform. And so all that history makes Concord a kind of a special place. And so today, Concord draws 1 million visitors per year. Mostly visitors come for the Revolutionary War history, the literary heritage sites, and the recreation and outdoor activities. So meanwhile, Concord's community is changing. Most notably, in the past 15 years or so, there's been an increase in the 65 plus and actually in the under 18 demographic. There's also been an increase in immigrant communities and communities of color. And this is all important for us to keep in mind in determining, who this site will serve. Concord is also facing pressures on housing and affordability. In 2022, nearly half of renters and 1 1/4 of homeowners spent over 30% of their income on housing. And additionally, the cost of condos and single-family homes has outpaced the increase in median income. So Concord is working hard to balance this growth. And in a robust housing production plan that kind of covers the years 2023, through 2028, there are some clear takeaways we got from that plan. And so the housing goals seem to be, number 1, focus on immediate and long-term affordability. Number 2, a focus on healthy aging, specifically the 65 plus demographic. An increase in rental and ownership variety. A focus on stabilizing housing for the vulnerable population. Emphasizing smaller homes, and a focus on outreach and education on the need for affordability. So what variables are at play? So what is foundational about the site? So these are the kind of the givens that we think are pretty fixed. First, Concord and the surrounding region welcome over 1 million visitors each year. Concord has a rich cultural and literary history. And the community is diversifying and facing growing pressures on housing and affordability. So what considerations or toggles will we explore? The sites and towns, future audiences and communities, the site's relationship to its layered history, West Concord's art and cultural resources, and growth and affordability goals. So the team also took a closer look at buildings and structures of the town and of the site itself. And what we found is that West Concord's, we kind of focused on West Concord's here. West Concord's housing patterns have historically evolved alongside changing industries. And the reformatory, or what we know as MCI Concord, specifically played a role in that development. So housing has evolved alongside changing industries. Around the 1800s, with the emergence of factories, the three villages of Westvale, Waterville, and then eventually Prison Village, or the reformatory, kind of developed as the main industries in town, with associated worker housing, which was single-family housing directly next to these factories and industries. And then with the introduction of faster transportation, the closing of some of the factories, we begin to see people, work outside of town, live in town, work out of town, and vice versa. And then with this shift came more multifamily and communal housing. So it kind of brings into question what types of housing will best serve the community moving forward. Is there an openness for more shared amenities and denser living, perhaps? And then just zooming into the prison itself, we've come to understand how it's been incredibly integral to the development of the town, but at the cost of incarcerated individuals. In the 90s, a new prison was built every 15 days, which has since proven unsustainable. And so now we're at this point in time when we can ask, how can we reallocate that energy and resources into something that's positive for all? Turn it over to Seth.
My part got edited down a little bit, so I'm going to jump in the middle. The next three slides, well, it's a pleasure to be here. Nice to meet you all for this exciting project. The next three slides are just meant to put on the table and keep on the table the disposition of the existing structures on site. And, there's two ways that we might look at that. One is through reclaiming that material, meaning from a sustainability perspective. What is going to happen to that material, buildings that get demolished? And my colleagues at Happold are going to talk about that. But the other is reuse. And could anything here be reused and adaptively reused and be part of the future of the site? I think in that, looking at it from that lens, there's sort of two poles. There's a couple buildings that clearly I think there's consensus around are historic and want to be preserved. And we're looking at in this diagram at the warden's house and the last remaining white row house. And then there's everything else. I think there's also probably going to be consensus forming around the cell blocks that those would be really difficult buildings to maintain, and there's a number of reasons why they might go. Speaking only from an architectural perspective, they're fragmented structures architecturally, meaning many levels. Mechanical systems are cellular. They'd be really hard to use again. But then there's other buildings, and I think talking to our colleagues at Design Justice, it's hard to predict what buildings will have meaning to people. And so it's worth looking at them and bringing them up through the workshop process. What buildings might we look at for preservation? The ones that architecturally are intriguing are these larger structures. So in orange and in red, there's two types of these in really broad categories. The orange ones, maybe we could use. The red ones, perhaps more interesting. These are all structures that have open floor plates. The orange buildings are narrow but have big windows. These are former administrative buildings. Maybe they could be used for something. And then there's big span structures. So there's three of these. Former gymnasium and school, workshop, and the intake building. And each of these have spaces that we could imagine not as housing, but maybe as some sort of public and commercial use. I just wanted to show them to you because they were a surprise on my tour of the site. What we found. So number one is a shops building. Number two is the intake building, there's a large garage, long span structure. 3 is an administrative building, and then a gym and library at the school building. So wrapping this up, what's foundational about the site in any scenario going forward? Historic buildings need to be considered for protection. Salvage of materials, whether it's from the prison wall or buildings will be demolished, is something we should look at. But the toggles and things we want to explore are balancing reuse against building new. What are the programs that could potentially be housed in those structures, even if not permanently, temporarily? And then for any of those reuse scenarios, upfront versus life cycle costs.
Do we ask? On this map, there's looks like 7 buildings that say facilities to remain.
You'll be next.
On the map, there's like 6 or 7 buildings that facilities to remain. I'm not sure. We haven't really toured those areas, and I'm just curious what those buildings are. Okay, in the dark ones and the black. There's 6 or 7 buildings by the river that are Concord or wastewater treatment facilities and maybe other things. We've never toured those buildings. We're just not sure what's in those buildings and what's being used and why they remain.
Some of them are functioning buildings. They're potentially part of the future.
Yeah, I just want to know.
So those are facilities buildings, that serve the jail prison site. I think my colleagues from Niche are going to be able to tell you really specifically what's happening in them. But the wastewater treatment facility will play a role in, the future.
So the
of
wastewater
site.
treatment, that's all part of the wastewater treatment facility or no?
Let me get to you. It's partly steam and partly wastewater.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, all. Thanks for the question. Brian Kramer with Niche. It's a great question. So yes, there are 3 buildings over there. There's the wastewater treatment plant sort of enclosure. There's the warehouse facility, and then a third sort of auxiliary building that's smaller. So let me get back to your original question about them, though. What are you trying to ascertain about those? Just
Well,
where they
you
rank
say
on
they're
this?
going to remain. I'm just curious, are they all going to be used and they're going to be functional and reused for this new redevelopment?
In short, to be determined, but yes, likely is where we're headed. But I think it's a fair point. We will work together to make sure that they are colored in the same manner on this slide. Thanks.
Are we ready to shift focus? Awesome. Great. Now that we've covered buildings and structures, let's shift our focus on what's outside and take a look at the environment and open space together. So we come to understand that Concord has a really rich network of open spaces, trails, and high-quality recreational amenities. For this site, there are opportunities to further expand that network to enhance the quality of experiences for a variety of audiences and to protect the valuable habitats and waterways. So first, Concord has identified recreation needs. This site is surrounded by several well-loved recreation facilities such as the Ride Out Playground and the Harvey Weller Community Center, but most of these facilities are beyond a 10-minute walking distance, which is the common benchmark we use to evaluate park access. This means that future residents and visitors on this site might have fewer convenient options for outdoor recreation. Zooming out, the town recently developed the Recreation Facility Strategic Plan, which look at both where Concord stands today and where it wants to be in the future. The plan recognized Concord's strong foundation in recreation facilities such as tennis court and indoor facilities like swimming pool. Concord is also meeting current needs in pickleball court, impressive. Also senior center. However, the plan also highlights areas for improvements as there are unmet needs in all these facilities from playground to indoor ice rink. So we understand that this site has the opportunity to help bridge these gaps by offering amenities that enhance outdoor experience for both future residents and the broader Concord community. All these information help inform our understanding of the recreation needs for the site and the community, but we will be exploring what that means for the vision and scenarios for this site with you all today. Beyond recreation, this site also plays an important role in Concord's natural systems. It sits within a rich network of waterways, including the Warner's Pond and the Assabet River. Both are valued community resources. We've heard stories of people ice skating on the pond in winter and fishing, boating, swimming in the summer. All of these activities seem to happen more frequently in the past. The water system is also home to many wildlife and plant species. We even spotted a beaver along the river during our site visit, which definitely made my day. However, these exciting moments seem to happen less frequently recently as these water bodies are facing serious challenges. Both the pond and the river are experiencing eutrophication and declining water quality. We also know that there's ongoing discussion about the future of the historical dam. All of these raise up the question for us and for this group that how can this site contribute to protecting and restoring these vital habitats and waterways? Finally, on-site trails disconnect from regional network. We understand that West Concord is part of a highly active regional trail network, primarily linked by the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail from north to south. And we can also see that from the map on the left that there's also an east-west connection that could potentially go through the site between the Assabet River Rail Trail and the Reformatory Branch Trail. With all these ongoing investments in trails, the site could potentially connect to a huge amount of regional bikers and pedestrians. Taking a look at the site itself as a previous reformatory, inherently the site lacks a complete trail system or walking experience. But we did notice there are informal trails along the river during the site visit. So we think these can be integrated into a more complete trail experience in the future with better signage, wayfinding, and improved access points to expand the system to a broader audience. So as we explore potential scenarios for this site, here are a few foundational elements we have in mind. First, the cemetery is staying in place. Second, the Warner's Pond and the Assabet River present unique opportunities for habitat restoration and recreation access. Third, there are regulations around wetland and riverbank protection buffers we need to consider. In terms of key questions the scenario should explore, these are a few questions that open up the discussion. First, the level of open space and recreation investment on the site. Second, the impacts of Warner's Pond planning effort. Third, relationship to surrounding agricultural land. And last but not least, how to commemorate the cemetery today and how to align with the ongoing efforts from Concord Prison Outreach. Yeah, these are all the questions we have in mind. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kristen.
Okay, great. Are you able to hear me? Yes, okay. So hi everyone, I'm Kristen Brzezowski. I'm here going to talk about transportation and access on the site. So what we're really thinking about is how to leverage the existing infrastructure. We have ample opportunity with the site, with the connection to Route 2, as well as the walking distance from downtown West Concord, the West Concord train station, as well as the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail as well. So thinking about how the site is currently accessed. So we do have on the left-hand side a slide that shows how trips in and out of Concord are currently being, how people are transporting in and out of Concord, which is primarily via vehicle. So we understand there's a really substantial opportunity to increase multimodal forms of transportation from the site. And on the right, we show current access points to the site and potential planned projects for near the road. So when we're looking at this side, we have on the left what the current access points for the site as is and the existing conditions. What we understand is there is currently a MassDOT plan to convert this site, and that's a little screenshot on the top left of the right-hand graphic. And what we really understand is that there's an opportunity to overlay how we're proposing to use this site with this MassDOT redevelopment. So we want to understand what our potential programming is and how that could impact traffic and how we can look at a site that is impermeable, fairly impermeable right now, to a permeable site that is both working with the program as we propose it and how it's going to impact the traffic base and how to redistribute the traffic as is. And on the next slide, so one of the key pieces that we have been evaluating is the safety, specifically related to the rotary. What we have here is traffic data that shows that there is a substantial amount of density of vehicles going through and adjacent to the site. We additionally have Commonwealth Ave, which is perpendicular to the Route 2, as everyone I'm sure knows, which is experiencing about 10 times the volume that it really should be handling due to its proximity to the rotary and people trying to kind of cut around the Route 2 traffic. So that's one piece that we are considering. And then on the right-hand side, we have crash data. So it essentially shows that the rotary does experience 5 times the amount of crashes compared to the statewide average. So it's really understanding how we can work with that MassDOT project to understand what would be the best and most optimal overlay with the development of the site. So yeah, key variables in play. So Route 2 is going to stay, it's going to remain, and how do we interact with Route 2 as our site? The Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, really strong opportunity. It cuts right by the site. And we have the Assabet River Bridge and Trail underway project, so that's something to keep in mind as well. What considerations, what opportunities do we have? So the Route 2 rotary redesign is a key piece of how we integrate with the site as it is. The network connections, how do people permeate our site from the different connections that do exist now versus what they're going to be in the future? And how do we promote sustainable forms of transportation? How can we promote biking and access to the MBTA station? Great. I'll pass it off. I almost grabbed the mic.
Thanks. So again, Brian Kramer with Ditch Engineering, supporting the agency team and the town on sort of all things infrastructure related. So there's quite a bit of unknowns, but we're starting to get a clearer picture about the knowns for subsurface utilities, tunnels, and service capacity. So that's sort of my big picture take home that we've gotten to so far. We've gotten a lot of survey data and sort of record plan information, environmental site assessment from DCAM in recent weeks. We are combing through that. It is still limited in what we can discern from it, but we do know sort of horizontal locations. Verticals are sort of the unknown. So when you, It is complex. It is a nest of utilities under there, I think, as everyone would have expected, and of varying ages and sort of condition. We have a clearer picture, though, on drainage, sewer connections to the site. Largely those we would anticipate to be no longer needed in a redevelopment scenario, but some of them do need to remain, right? Because the wastewater treatment plant is actively serving certainly state police and other nearby offsite assets, as well as restroom facilities within buildings that presumably may remain into the future, certainly historic ones. I also want to sort of make note of the unknowns / potential with the sand beds. So the southeast portion of the site, for those who don't understand, the very light yellow hatch there is a series of existing but not in active use sand beds that were used for wastewater treatment and on-site disposal prior to the current wastewater treatment plant being constructed. Those are no longer in use, but in situ, and we do need to either figure out a way to either address them and potentially remove them, or use them as an asset, and sort of exploring both options because they are potentially an asset for on-site additional capacity and additional disposal. But that will take some sort of creative work with the town, also with Weston Sampson, that we understand that the town is working with actively to do some more study of that treatment facility. So the take home here is we've got a clearer picture, but it's certainly not 2020 at this point in time. Good thing we're only sort of halfway through that analysis phase. We've still got time to do this. I do want to talk about the wastewater treatment plant. It is really important. The fact that this facility exists and is potentially an asset of the town's, it cannot express how, I think, important it is to a developer to have that, a potential developer, sorry, to have that on site. It also can be a constraint, right? There's just like the nuts and bolts of the smells and being next to a wastewater treatment facility, particularly in the heat of the summer. So capacity issues, though, and sort of capacity opportunities, sort of broken out into 3 buckets, if you will. So certainly the wastewater treatment plant needs to continue to serve adjacent site uses and the remaining on-site uses into the future. I think there's a potential that it serves the town's needs, but certainly the West Concord Village, and potentially redirecting force main to this facility. And then sort of the third use, the blue that you're seeing there, generally to serve the development itself, right? And yeah, I'll leave it there. So that, yeah, please.
I just have a question about the current state of the plant. I believe we have a 300,000 gallon per day permit. I also know that there's been a significant investment suggested, like up to $25 million to modernize it.
Correct.
Does it currently operate at 300,000 gallons per day? And assuming that we did kind of acquire control of it or purchase it as a town, would it be useful to that degree? And would the $25 million, is that like an optional thing we could push out the road? Or do we have to make a substantial investment right up front to get the benefit of the additional capacity?
In short, I will offer that I'm going to a little bit defer to Alan and ask you to help me out on this one. But the short answer that I think is that yes, an investment is required, right? But bare minimum, there's sort of maintenance considerations and upgrades that are needed. To that full 25 million level, I don't think so. But I'll offer that maybe Alan and sort of the engineering team have other advice.
Yes, Alan Cathcart, Director of Public Works. We've been more in the drilling into the weeds on the assessment. So just for the benefit of the community, both the town of Concord through our own consultant and DCAM through their own consultant engineer have agreed that in order to restore the facility to the 310,000 gallons a day, there is somewhere in the $25 million range is the right number. How that would be achieved could be phased, but in order to have the full capacity over the next 5 to 10 years, we should be looking at that as a
I guess one more follow-up then. So let's say that we weren't in a position to do 25 million right away. How much capacity would there be today if we took it over?
So presently, the facility, how do I put this? It has been operating with some challenge to continue business as usual, with an understanding the state hasn't invested in it in a long time and is not intending to invest in it too much in the short term. So we're in a kind of a critical path where in order to keep it operational, there's probably short money that's going to have to be spent within the next couple of years in order to sort of do more robust and treatment beyond what's existing, because it's only about 60 to 80,000 gallons a day presently. There's going to need millions of dollars of investment in the next 5 years.
Thanks.
Thanks, Al. I will offer that, sorry, before we go on any other questions on utilities and or wastewater treatment plant. Sure.
What's the future of the steam plant? What's the future of the steam plant?
Thank you. I will offer it is also in a way serving existing facilities and can't necessarily go away in the short term. I don't think it is sort of a value add to a developer to keep it. And I think that a redevelopment would need to likely propose new heating and cooling for the buildings that remain, independent of the steam plant. So I guess the take home is likely that we would not need it in the future.
Okay.
That's my take.
It's on your map as like buildings to remain, and I'm just thinking if that's going to be disappearing, there's maybe more opportunity for other
Did
uses.
I characterize that right? I hope so. So, yeah.
I mean, we kept those all black.
Yeah.
In a separate category because it requires further study by this team.
Okay.
To decide which of those buildings would remain.
Okay.
It's really important you guys speak into the mic because people on Zoom can't hear.
Okay.
Can I add a question? It looked like from the utility diagram that the steam plant doesn't serve any of the off-site parcel. Like it doesn't serve the farm or the state police. Is that accurate?
That's correct. That's our understanding, yeah.
Thanks.
Advance it too much. So I will skip to variables at play, sort of summary slide. So certainly we talked through the pieces on the left. Wastewater treatment plant upgrades, environmental permitting and sort of offsets and what we do with the riverfront area, and how we manage the current waste disposal sort of outfall and sort of other drainage outfalls on the east portion of the site. And the idea of tunnels as a potential asset, but also sort of the unknowns of condition and ultimately materials that are embedded in there, asbestos or whatever happens to be down there. So that is something that we're grappling with, and it's not unique to this site. Right? Many DCAM sites have that tunnel system. What we don't know yet is sort of size and depth. So the Z and the vertical access is the unknown piece now. And then I'll talk through sort of the goals or considerations as we explore test fits or as we explore sort of uses on the site, how we gameplay out sort of the physical area that stormwater will take up on the site, and how it's sort of integrated within other site elements. It can't just sort of be a basin on the east side. It's really, I think, wants to be integrated within the rest of the development, and in alignment with many of the other sort of Town of Concord initiatives about green infrastructure and incorporating that into better site design. And I'll offer that how we reuse the existing materials, whether they are, let's say, the wall, for example, but there's lots of other sort of existing materials on site. I'll offer that others can speak to that as well, but certainly from a utilities demo trenching perspective, what we do with those once we dig them up and potentially not dispose of them onto another site is, I think, really important to the ultimate sustainability story and goals of the future development here.
Can I just add a follow-up question on Aaron's point, can we go back to that slide for a second? I'm doing this from memory, which is always, one more, the one where you have the utilities. Yeah, what's that line that's running up towards the farm?
It's an existing sewer that serves the farm.
Okay, okay.
My understanding, I believe it's a force main.
Yeah, okay, so the steam didn't make its way up there, to your point.
That's our
No,
understanding.
that's wastewater treatment.
Yes, no, I understood, right, thank you.
And I think over to Amy.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Fader from Landwise Advisors. We have been jumping into several things in the economic and feasibility topic. So first off, we're really trying to understand demographic trends and employment trends. We are also looking at the real estate market and what the private market has been building, and delivering on their own, and trying to get, a handle on who's building what and why. Additionally, we've been thinking about the town's sort of fiscal landscape. So we know this is a town with a large residential tax base. You have a lot of conservation land, a lot of historic districts. The opportunities for large-scale commercial development are fairly limited, and this is a site which obviously could handle, larger scale buildings. And then we will be doing the financial modeling and feasibility testing, and working closely with the engineering team to understand the costs associated with a lot of the site prep. And so a couple things are becoming clear. And so as we think about this site, it is a highly visible site with lots of people passing by that could obviously handle, mixed-use development. So that is clear. The scale of development that occurs here needs to offset some upfront costs. And so balancing that scale with transportation capacity and what the public appetite is for density is something that we will need to consider through this process. It's also important to contextualize the site in the region and kind of what's going on nationally. So we are all aware that there's a housing crisis in Massachusetts, and housing is in need here. I'll talk a little bit about the office market because I think that's where the headlines have been less clear. So you might see headlines, Boston office market is doing better than other major cities, right? Boston's lucky. We have an eds and meds economy that sort of necessitates some presence in the office. But I think what we're really seeing is that hybrid work models are widely adopted. People are still not building speculative office space. And that's probably going to continue for some time. We've seen some permitted mixed-use developments actually go back for amendments to remove office space from their permits. And then, the supply of lab space boomed for the last decade and really is an oversupply. So this is a post-pandemic, mixed-use development, and how you think about what mixes come together to make a great place is challenging. On top of that, I think the federal landscape, the federal policies are changing kind of the landscape in real estate. And so there's a couple things playing out right now. I think higher ed, which is one of our regional strengths, is being hit hard in terms of endowment taxes, cuts to research funding. So that's playing out. And then, this week with the tariffs, you have the idea that manufacturing is going to resurge in the United States. And so that will take a long time to play out in the real estate world, but it's important to think about the macro factors in addition to what's going on locally. So in terms of housing, this chart here shows building permits for the last 2 decades. And so in gray, you see single family permits, and you see a pretty steady rate of delivery. But in orange, you see these big spikes, and those are multifamily permits. And what we've observed is that when the subsidized housing inventory has dipped below 10%, and developers are able to submit 40B applications, that's when you're seeing a large amount of housing come into your housing market. And so that happened historically, and then there's 2 major projects, one approved and one soon to be approved, that will add a lot of multifamily units to the town. And we know that there's probably some capacity in your schools, but maybe not unlimited capacity to keep taking on, large spikes in housing. So, something we're conscious of. In terms of employment, this chart here is the town of Concord's employment between 2017 and 2022. So unfortunately, a little bit stale in data. It does cover the pandemic years, but what you see is a negative tally of jobs. So that 142 number is actually jobs that were lost during that 5-year period. If you compare this to the region or the MSA, you'll see both of those areas had growth. And those charts are in the longer deck that we supplied. But what's really astounding is the number of jobs that are in the healthcare sector is above and beyond any other sector by quite a bit. And that's followed by professional, scientific, and technical services, as well as education services. On the right, you see the Concord workforce is about 8,000 people. So that's not your whole population, right? That's the working age population. And a lot of those folks are commuting out of town to work. A number are staying in town. And then what's really interesting is that the amount of people, the jobs in Concord is the 12,000 number. 92% of those jobs are filled by people from out of town. And so my hypothesis on this, tell me if I'm wrong, is that people who are working in Concord can't afford to live here. So there's sort of a mismatch between housing costs, and then your job supply and what those jobs may pay. This is a map that takes the top 5 employment sectors in the MSA and shows you sort of a context for the site. And so you can see this strong clustering along 128 with professional, scientific, and technical services. You can see sort of the core of education, in Cambridge. And this area along Route 2 is a really interesting area, right? It's the bridge between 128 and 495. And you have this education strength that's happening there that's very clear. On the fiscal topic, we know there's a lot of goals for this site, but I think limiting public spending is something that we are cognizant of, right? This is an area where you have the 5th highest tax bill in Massachusetts. It's up 45% since fiscal year 16, so people have seen a huge increase in their tax bills. We know that you've built new schools, and so there's some debt from that, and so we're just conscious of those things. We don't have great numbers on this yet, right? Because obviously we're working through infrastructure issues to try to understand the order of magnitude for site preparations. But we know that this is not a greenfield site, and this has immense upfront costs. So both market-driven uses and mission-driven uses might be something we want to see here. But obviously market-driven uses which pay taxes might be something that people find more palatable. So variables at play. We know that housing that's financially accessible remains in demand, that some rezoning will be required, that these site prep costs will drive a lot of the development, that this mix of uses could capitalize on Concord's employment strengths, as well as its cultural strengths, which Robin talked about earlier. And then in terms of the toggles, the public appetite for density and how that density is sort of designed to be sensitive to its context, the level of new construction versus reuse, funding that can be leveraged to support the redevelopment, penciling out a unified vision for what the use mix is, thinking about an anchor that would really spark economic activity on the site, and then the level of inclusionary or affordable units that are desired or required. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna just quickly check and make sure. Okay, on battery. We're great on battery. All right, so I'm going to share quickly a mapping of what we understand to be fixed and flexible on site physically, and then we'll answer any other questions that you all have before we shift into talking about themes. So we've started to organize our understanding of fixed by the places on site that we know are historic. I think as we had shared previously and in the longer slide deck, Designing Justice, Designing Spaces has been digging into your historic nomination and understands that while the buildings are historic, they are historic as per state guidelines, but not national. And so it influences how we think about what happens to those spaces. Cemetery is fixed, it is not going away. You have a 200-foot river buffer that is a state regulation. You cannot build within existing parks and trails like the Bruce Freeman Trail, as well as, and I think we should edit this because it sounds like it's quasi-fixed, the sand pits, which you can see a couple of the sand pits now. Many of them you can no longer see in an aerial, but they do still exist. On the flexible side, the places that we imagine can be changed are, as the Merge team shared, many of the MCI buildings that have reuse potential, and also buildings that could go away. The agricultural land considerations, especially adjacent to the site. We know that there is, I'm going to put in a plug for the public workshop that's happening this evening for Warner's Pond, because that conversation is very much going to influence the direction of our work too. The underground utilities, which again, we don't really have a sense for what those are, and we're trying to map those as best we can, but I think there is a degree to which those need to flex to support new development, as well as the solar panels on site. And then on the flex side, entirely flex, I imagine that Mass DOT might disagree with this, but we feel like we have a lot of influence over what happens to Route 2, given that this project now precedes the future design of that space. So a lot of leeway to do what we think is best for the town of Concord. This is also a moment that, again, as Merge said, a chance to rethink the existing structures, to consider the future of open space and of park amenities in the town, and then also to consider site access. And I know that there are places that make the most sense for access to occur today, but given the changes to Route 2 and given what we know about Commonwealth Ave and how much work that does, gives us a lot of room to kind of make change. And so it ends up being this very blobby, nebulous map that essentially communicates that the spaces closest to the river, the spaces closest to the spaces that are bisected by the trail are your most fixed. So everything along the perimeter, and the spaces that are most flexible are very much at the center of this site or on the other side of the road. And so we're going to continue to adapt this, explore this, especially given the conversation we had about the steam plant and the future of those those buildings adjacent to the walls of the prison. But this will continue to evolve. Does anyone have any? We've gone through a lot. Does anyone have any questions about what we've shared as it relates to the 6 topic areas? I know we've asked some clarifying questions as we've gone along.
This is Emily online. If I can ask a quick question.
Of course.
Yeah, and I did put this in the chat. Just going back to the wastewater treatment plant, I didn't notice any odors from the plant when I was touring the overall site, but I know some plants do emit odors, whether it's related to the chemicals that treat the water. Is there anything we should be aware of that may be a deterrent to the broader development? Maybe that's a question for Alan.
I'm going to offer my opinion. In short, in the heat of the summer, if we sort of leave the wastewater treatment plant with the minimum amounts of upgrades, the smell will be there, right? I don't know that there's
You said the smell will be there?
Mm-hmm. I don't see a way that it isn't. There are ways to mitigate that, right? Certainly the upper end of that $25 million number certainly mitigates that. Literally just putting a cap on top of the treatment facility pits will help. But there's still a zone that on a hot day, you're going to notice it. That is also just a hazard of being near a wastewater treatment plant. It's not, not necessarily a public health issue as much as it's just a nuisance. I don't know if that answers the question well enough, Emily, but, and I don't know if there's anything I got wrong there. Okay, great.
Yeah, no, that's great, thanks. And then I guess at the risk of stating the obvious, we should be thoughtful about sort of the design of what we put adjacent to that, right? I mean, multifamily units aren't going to be as appealing if they're overlooking a wastewater treatment plant. Recreation facilities probably wouldn't enjoy the odor, so we should just be thoughtful about what we're putting adjacent to the plant.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I think that we've been digging into a lot of precedents as well, and for what it's worth, I don't know if anyone's ever been to Burlington, Vermont. But Burlington, Vermont similarly has a much larger capacity wastewater treatment facility right along the banks of Lake Champlain, right in downtown. It does have those issues as Nitch was sharing, that it does, on a particularly hot day, it can be a little bit smelly. But they have a variety of parks, recreational facilities, as well as residential spaces nearby, and have been proactively working to reduce that. And so I think there are precedents, as as we brought up, as Brian brought up, that can help. If we do the bare minimum, it might not have an effect, but there are ways to mitigate that and to enable what we've envisioned to happen alongside this facility.
Thank you.
And I'll offer one additional example that others may be familiar with. They've been to Newburyport. Granted, they have an ocean breeze there, so that we don't in our condition here. But it is a good example of sort of how passive recreation and wastewater treatment facilities can coexist, same space. But I hear you loud and clear on sort of playground, noxious uses next to, that probably don't cohabitate.
So my question might be a little premature, but the fix, that your summary slide that you had up there, it looks like it was mostly concentrating on the site itself, right? It wasn't, there are other fixed things that, and depending upon where you're going to take this, that might be important to add to the list, whether it's the commuter rail station or West Concord Village or any of those things. But so that's why I'm saying that maybe it's premature. I just wanted to throw that out as a question.
No, I appreciate the question. I do think that it is something we do want to explore and have been exploring, but have been trying to be thoughtful about, like, what is the bounds of what we are responsible for, so that we aren't presupposing any futures that maybe others might be in disagreement with us on. But I do agree it is something that we want to continue to include.
Just a question with regard to categorization of the fixed, possibly flex and flex. When you refer to junction.
With your categories of fixed, possibly flex, and flex, where would you put Junction Village in terms of the deed restriction? And is that something we need to be aware of for this analysis?
I think that we've placed Junction Village in the fixed category because we know that it falls within the MBTA Communities Act. But I think that there are, given our understanding of how the regulation is written and how it can be used and how the town has applied it, I think there are opportunities to think about, considering how it relates to this site and how we might react to or move where things happen within that expectation. But we do understand that there is a requirement for the number of units that need to happen there. Amy, do you want to add?
I'm just going to add, so I read the deed restriction, and I see what you mean about the affordable housing being a requirement on the deed. So the level of affordability is not specified in that, and there was some language where it seemed like if there was an agreement between the state and the town, you might be able to revise something about the deed. But at this point, I think it's fixed that there would need to be affordable housing based on the deed restriction. And I don't know if we should have a solicitor look at the language if there's something about the site plan that necessitates its change.
So I was wondering about the workforce information, and specifically whether or not you have a sense of where that's going directionally, for example, is the trend towards more of the workforce working in town or vice versa? And maybe if you could even take another step further in terms of what the impact of, say, a bump in multi-family housing might have in terms of where it would push those workforce numbers, so that we could understand what that means in terms of the both housing and the creation of, possibly workspaces.
Yeah, so the workforce data we showed is fairly high level, but some additional statistics. 12% of Concord's workforce is actually self-employed, which is interesting. And then there is some reporting on telecommuting, people who full-time telecommute. That data is about 17%, so it's pretty high, but how it marries with the inflow, outflow data, they come from different sources, so I wasn't able to marry that for you. But I do think you have more people working from home and in hybrid models.
Mark, I had a similar question because I was wondering, of those people who leave town to work, how many could we retain in Concord by putting essentially moving their jobs to the site? And also on the people who come into town to work, I get your hypothesis, but I wonder how many of those folks we could really realistically accommodate, with better housing options, right?
Yeah.
So drilling into those numbers would be helpful.
It seems to me that, when you marry that with the spike in housing that we've clearly had whenever we've fallen below 40B, it kind of brings up a question about what changes in the workforce deployment occur when that occurs. And the other one is, we have two fairly large projects for us on the docket now. What happens if this is the third project or the fourth project that looks like that? What's the capacity of our individual market to absorb that?
I mean, I think we'll be talking to the school department as we get into the fiscal impact assessment. It's helpful to understand, what they foresee as the capacity of the schools. I will say that multifamily housing units tend to have lower student generation ratios than single family homes. So while people think new housing creates, students, it's not the same ratio that's proven in a lot of the fiscal impact analysis that we do.
I think that'll be important to understand because I could have this number wrong, but I remember that when Trammell Crow was building the Muse at the southwest side of Concord, I think they have 300 or 350 units there. And I think that their forecast was that there would be 19 new students coming into the school districts. I think the number proved to be quite a bit higher than that. And so having some reliable forecasting capability around that particular issue is going to be really important to us.
So the city of Newton tracks every multifamily development that's built in their community and actually does some address mapping with their school enrollment. And so when we worked in Newton, they give us metrics to use for their community because they know they're tracking that. So, we can make generalizations based on other places we've worked and what the guidance has been, but I would recommend working with the school department to try to track that because it's good to have your own data.
Yeah. The other thought that I had that was related directly to that is this is a community where a lot of people would like to age in place, but for the availability of something smaller to downsize to. So there's a tremendous amount of latent bedroom capacity in that, 5-bedroom house that my wife and I are occupying by ourselves that, also factors into what might occur with school enrollment. So if we've created something that was attractive for people to downsize to, suddenly that we're opening up much higher capacity housing for families who will then approach the schools for services.
I think every broker I've talked to so far said they would build housing for downsizers.
Yeah. And so we have to realize that those units actually free up other units, which then do land in potential school age demand.
I have a question for Lane West. Hi, I'm sorry your name. I look down the road from a development standpoint in terms of the viability for a developer to pencil this out between the cleaning up of the site and the size and the constraints we have with the fixed buildings and what's going on the site. Looking at the site and the constraints and everything else, are we talking about, we're trying to balance small scale with Concord and not going too big box. We need housing. Are you concerned we're gonna have to go some serious massing to get this to pencil out for a developer?
I don't think we have enough information yet about the cost of the site prep and of the public amenities that you want to tie to the project to really answer like the
Right.
number of stories or how many square feet we think that
No,
you need to accommodate. But we'll get there. But when you think about a multifamily housing project that might be built in the typical level of public amenity that gets tied to it, it's not typically district scale, right? There might be people making some offsite improvements to transportation, supplying affordable housing, doing some public open space adjacent to their project, but they're not also faced with providing upgrades to a public sewer or, so like the whole puzzle needs to be looked at with better cost numbers. So.
But you're optimistic that this can work out for a developer based on what you've seen so far?
Too early to answer.
Scott, the other thing that seems interesting here is that you have the whole cyclicality, right? So whether it would pencil out today, it might have 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and it might again in 4 or 5 years.
Right.
I want to pick up on that point because what I'm curious about is, and I'm going to go a little bit higher, 10,000 feet or whatever. One of the interesting things that you guys did with your work is you said you went back and looked at the history, and there was a time when the housing was created to support the industry and vice versa. And my question, I guess, in a maybe a clumsy way is that horse out of the barn, so to speak? Is it possible that we could actually create an environment where people could live and work from you guys are sort of at the cutting edge of what other cities and towns are doing, and I'm curious.
Well, I'm gonna just wanted to sort of try to answer, not exactly. I'm going to give a non-answer to your question.
Thank you.
I think part of our work will be to look at creative solutions. So it might not be a pure market-driven deal. There may be a mission-driven component to it. There may be a need to have an additional partner that helps kind of fill a gap. So we're not going to just leave it with it pencils, go for it, there's a developer, or it doesn't pencil, there's no way forward. We're going to explore what the possibilities might be for having a little bit more creative approach to implementation.
Thank you.
Second question, Dan's question about, can you help me? My brain only. Oh, yeah. I think it's a really fascinating question, and there are examples where there's a clear sort of linking of the industry, the types of jobs that are available, the companies that are existing in a physical location with the type of housing you're providing. We have a strong tradition of paternalist industry here
where the industry owners provided housing. I don't think we would do that necessarily. I think that'd be a little bit like sort of slave labor type of situation. But there are lots of a lot of incentives that could be created, a lot of policy, like just incentives or policies that these companies have around housing that would incentivize people to live close to where they work.
Okay, thanks. What I'm thinking about, without putting you on the spot, although I'm going to do it, is you're doing your own small part with the wheelhouse by keeping some of those people in town. You're not doing housing immediately adjacent to it, but that was what was, the net result of that seems to me was keeping some of those people, or giving them an alternative to leaving.
Yeah, so most of the people who work in the wheelhouse used to work someplace else, often outside of Concord. So you're right. Can I just make one more comment to your 10,000-foot level? I question with this whole, all right, I'm challenged by this whole question of growth and whether growth is something that's even necessary. Now, that's an extreme statement, right? But I think we need to be careful not to assume that we want to put as much as we possibly can onto the site, right? I think we need to think carefully about what opportunities we have to achieve some of the community's goals. But the objective should not be to max out the amount of housing, commercial space, whatever. I think we can afford to be measured in what we do. And this doesn't have to be the densest site in the whole, in the state. Like, for example, I wouldn't even suggest this, but just as a hypothetical, we could just turn the whole thing into walking trails. That would be low cost, wouldn't help us on our commercial real estate kind of tax revenue thing, but I just want to be careful that we don't default into a mode where we feel like we have to support as much growth as possible.
Can I answer that too? Just add a point to that. Maybe don't forget, this isn't really up to us either. We don't know what the state is going to say. We have to, I mean, I think if we said we all want all walking trails there, they'd say no way, because they've already said they want housing. So just to keep that in mind, we don't actually know.
Ree, you're going to launch us into this abbreviated exercise, but the goal of the next phase, the scenarios, is to explore the range of possibilities. And density is one of the variables. And I would say we will never go there, but we do want to have a bookend of what like the densest possible scenario could be, just so people can react to like nothing and just crazy dense. And then there'll be lots of things in between that mix and match and address the sort of fiscal challenges and DCAM's needs as well.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And a great transition into talking about site identities. So I realize we are a little bit behind in terms of our agenda, which if you know me, I hate being late. So we're gonna move quickly through this. Jan and I are gonna walk through the site identities, but I think, John, back to your point earlier, we were struck by your vision document and all of the different visions that were captured within that vision document. And so, I think as Jan said earlier really nicely, this is an exercise in what is realizable fiscally, like what can we do here against what are our values? And so we want to get a better sense for the value side of it as we continue to dive into the fiscal reality side. And so what that means is that there are 5 essentially, we go back and forth on what these names are, but values or moods that we felt came out of your vision document, that came out of conversations that we've heard so far with various different stakeholders. And so we want to get a better sense from you all, from the folks online, what identities you want to prioritize from the vision statements that you've assembled. And we'll go through these in a bit more detail, but we imagine that there are really 5 kind of identities that have emerged for us. I'll let Jan go through them in a bit more detail, but what we want to do after this, after she runs through those, is to let you kind of walk through the room. Each of these 5 topics or 5 identities has a series of precedents. Some of those ideas came from you. Some of those ideas came from our research into adaptive reuse of prison sites. Some of those have nothing to do with development at all, but they are just an assemblage of what we think capture each of those topic areas. And we want to hear both what do you think about that idea? What do you think about that identity? And then we're going to ask you, you have little placemats online. You will also have a placemat. Don't worry, we haven't left you out. You have a placemat. We want you to start to structure what you imagine the future site looks like using each of these identities. And so Jan's going to walk through each one, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the activity.
And loosen up. Like, this was a lot of information over the last hour and a half. Lots of technical information, lots of challenges and opportunities. But this is really just relax. Just tell us what you like and what you don't like. You don't have to be like super intentional about it. Just this is an exercise around what ideas are good ideas to take to another level. And I can do this. Okay. So and as Ree said, these are 5, but I wouldn't say they're the only 5. So you may have other ideas that you want to get on the boards. All of these have different themes, as Ree says, but they will also have, within them, we will explore housing. We will explore financial feasibility. We will explore what are anchor uses, how much commercial use, how much open space, what the road system should look like. They'll all have all of those. It's just a question of what the relative emphasis and the overall vibe and feel of the place should be. So the first one is really about really leaning into the healthy, green, restoring the ecosystem, the watershed ecosystem. If we think about what kind of anchors that might, like what kind of active, productive uses might happen in that context, maybe it's something to do with healthcare. Maybe it's something to do with some kind of wellness industry type thing. Some of the potential features might be additional trails and places to view the wildlife. Could there be a nature center? I mean, I know we already have the Walden Center, but could there be some other kind of nature center? Could the housing be much more about the houses that they're not surrounded by, you don't drive your car right up to your house. You're in a kind of natural setting. You're watching the poor deer jumping across Route 2 and running through your yard. But it's like an overall theme of healthy and green, and that doesn't, in my mind, connote density necessarily. Another one would be to really lean into the climate friendly. This might, go beyond net zero. Maybe this is a net positive place where we're doing everything we do is through the lens of how to reduce the impact, the negative impact it has on the climate. And it could have green industry as an anchor use. The housing could be completely net positive. And how we handle transportation, it might be all shared transportation, all clean electric transportation. So like a really strong leaning into the whole climate theme. Another theme might be really lean into the West Concord vibe and create a place that supports both the kind of recreational needs of the town and has a lot of stuff going on there that kids and people of all ages can participate to get, for recreation, and also have a kind of arts theme to it. So what does that mean? Maybe there's some kind of another Concord museum or some kind of art installation or collective for artists or other kinds of organizations that promote recreation and the arts. And so really lean into that theme in terms of reusing the buildings or, promoting those kinds of activities in the open space. The fourth theme, where we're thinking of it as a place to consolidate and house Concord's public works, and think of this as a campus for public works. That has a sort of, that's kind of like, doesn't seem like it's quite the same type of theme or vibe as the others, but we could explore it. Like if we're talking about town's infrastructure and the way the town's the public works services the town, what kinds of things might we do differently here? What land would we free up elsewhere in town? That could, it's at least worth thinking about. Sorry if I'm giving an opinion here in a subtle way. And then the last one, really, I think incubating or innovation or thinking about this site as another important hub of research and academic research and industry partnerships along the Route 2 corridor, kind of halfway between 128 and 495. And what would that mean? Like, would that mean attracting some kind of an educational anchor, a research anchor, even an industry anchor that might promote certain kinds of commercial uses, the spaces for collecting, a kind of creating a cluster of industry here. And this might be the option where you start looking at that live-work housing. Or maybe there's even an idea of housing production. So exploring prototyping, 3D printing of housing, or something like that. There could, the sky's the limit. Think outside of the box. So those are some of the ideas just to get your juices cooking. And Ree, you're going to tell us what to do.
Yes. All right. So as Jan so nobly shared the 5 different kind of avenues or vibes that were presented in a lot of the work that you all have shared with us to date, what we want to do now is to essentially, we'd love for you to walk around the room, add to the themes, use stickies or markers to add to the identities posters. We've printed out a lot of our own precedents in front of Amy and Jan, as well as your precedents. If you want to share if there are any precedents that you think need to be part of these boards or our understanding, please let us know. Otherwise, for those in the room, and of course for those online, I'll let you, if you want to mute us, you're welcome to do that now. But I'm going to walk through what we want you to do with your placemats. So with your placemats, you'll see that there are 4 questions. And then there's also a little circle in the center. And so we need your name just so that we know we can circle back to you when if we have questions. But what we want you to do is start to craft what levels of each of these identities you imagine make their way into the future of this site. So I think we already know what John is going to do. John is going to be all green because he wants trails and he wants wildlife. That is what John wants to see. But for the rest of you, this is a moment for you to express what future you want. And it can be a mix of all 5. It could just be 4 of them. It could be 2 of them. It could be 1 of them. We've pre-cut some of them, and we'll give you scissors so that you can cut them even further if you only want 10% of the pie. But what we want to know with that circle is how much of each identity needs to present itself on site. And then if you could describe it in a bit more detail with the second question, and then with the third question, share an inspiring example that you think represents that vision. Do you have a question? Any questions from this group? Do you know what you have to do? All right. Okay. So for those online, we're behind, so we're just gonna give everybody 10 minutes, and then I'll circle back and see how you all are doing online. 10 minutes. Hello. Hey, everybody online. We see you still moving. We're going to get settled over here.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
online
Kate.
folks, we had 2 very active participants. Thanks, Emily and Mary. If there are other online folks who would like to make a pie chart in the background, feel free to chat me, and I can do that for you in the background, or Jamaica as well.
Great. All right. Thank you all for participating in this activity. We only have 3 minutes. We're very much over time to the extent that our half hour of sharing back is not going to happen. But I do wonder if there is a willing volunteer to share a little bit about where they landed with their identity. I think we had some creative folks in this group. I will just throw that out there. All right, Aaron.
All right. So I didn't follow the rules. So I mean, I like all of the things sounded great and like seemed like they wanted to be incorporated in some way. So my diagram has sort of half incubator and half some sort of active artsy driver. And then I felt like we can't not be climate friendly and not be green and healthy. So those were sort of dispersed throughout the diagram. And then I had a tiny little slice for supportive because there's obviously some infrastructure there that's pretty important.
Okay.
That's it.
Sure. I think I've said this already, but I also didn't follow the rules. So climate tech incubator, this idea of having an educational anchor that has a satellite campus, which I know you just said that no one's going to have any money in education, but we'll just ignore the realities for now, ignoring reality. So some sort of satellite campus, I think it would be very cool to have students on site and have some housing. I think the housing should be really interesting. I think 3 of us now have used the word Scandinavian housing in a nebulous way of something interesting and climate friendly. And then tech incubators to bring a stronger commercial tax base without getting too much development. So that's what I'm thinking.
Sure, I did something similar. I figured that all development has to be sustainable in terms of how it's done, so I put that in and undergirded the whole thing. Then I broke it up into several quadrants. Town services have improved the land, have improved, and the land is reused elsewhere for housing and workplaces. The red allocation would be for historic, cultural, and entertaining. I really feel like people want to go there. The incubation culture would be the driver on the economic side, being a great place to work. We should be asking ourselves the question, how did Concord exist without this by the time we're done? And healthy recreation and, river walking passive, taking advantage of the beautiful green buffers that are going to need to be there.
Thank you, Mark. And I appreciate, too, that you're digging into revenue-generating potential of each one while also leaning into values and creating a destination. Does anyone in this group, John?
Mine actually was almost identical to Aaron's, but I didn't present it as creatively. So I had kind of the innovative piece, the recreation and active piece, and I just said that the blue and the green were going to be pervasive in whatever we do. We're going to be climate friendly. We're going to be environmentally sensitive. So I'm assuming that. I like the way you did that, Mark.
Kate, can I kick it over? Oh, do you want to do it?
I was just going to say, mine was much more specific. It was an MIT spinoff with high-density mixed use and climate-smart development complementary to West Concord Village.
Wow, what a marketing slogan, too.
I'm sorry, was that 3 words?
So I was envisioning a vibrant neighborhood feel with green spaces, access to river, walking trails, intermingling with Scandinavian designed housing, site anchored by an artsy or innovative tech incubator with small business retail for small businesses, and the site buffering Route 2 noise, so like buffering the noise so it doesn't really feel like it's part of Route 2 and it's not like an offshoot, but it feels like a little small independent small town.
Lovely. All right. I think I don't know if anyone else wants to share. Okay. Online, I know that we're over time by a minute, but if you all are willing to humor us with one of yours.
Sure, I can go. I think actually Mary and I we're pretty similar. I think we lean heavily on the active and artsy, and bleeding inside sort of like the West Concord Village community to this site. I love the idea of sustainability and the component of reusing some of the materials of MCI for history and creativity in the development. Scott, similar to you, sort of smaller retail, maybe minority focused retail, not big box retailers, with a component of commerce in there as well. That was sort of my incubating block. And then I would heavily favor a sort of organized recreational facility to complement the outdoor green spaces.
Very good.
Great. Mary, did you also want to share yours, or are you?
No, I think Emily did a great job. She's right. We were pretty in sync.
You were very in sync. Nice to see them side by side. All right. Well, we appreciate all of you taking the time to workshop what you imagine the identity of the site can be. And I'm struck by just how multifaceted each of your sites were. I was surprised that there weren't more kind of one color or two color examples. So thank you for engaging in this. We imagine that essentially what our next steps are is to continue evaluating, analyzing each of those topic areas. As Brian from Niche said, as Amy said, there's still information that we're trying to collect to make sure that we have the best information to make good decisions for the scenarios. But what we want to do with these identities is start to assemble 3 scenarios that help to capture each of those identities. And so we're going to take your placemats from you, and we are going to catalog those. And then we are also we plan to do something quite similar with the public. We imagine that they have thoughts on what they imagine the identity of the site will be. And so we'll be asking them to do something similar, telling us what elements of each identity they would like to capture. So we'll share more on that with the the outreach subcommittee tomorrow. But then also, of course, we'll share more details about how that is taking shape with this group too. All right, anything else in closing, Dan?
No, that was great. Just trying to see if there's any other thing we have to do.
I just want to add quickly, I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person, but the exercise and the ability to do that virtually was really nice and a nice way to pull us all into it, so thank you.
Agreed. No, I think that's it. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.